You know that feeling when you're staring at the gym mirror, just drenched in sweat, feeling completely frustrated because the effort you're putting in just doesn't seem to match the outcome? You log the hours, you lift the heavy weights, and yet the results just don't look like the magazines? Well, today we are going to look at the exact reasons why. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to unpack how we've been sold a lie that effort strictly equals outcome in bodybuilding. We're going to break down the actual science, the genetics, and the extreme costs of physical perfection.
Okay, let's dive right into what we're covering today. First, we'll shatter some bodybuilding myths, then we'll talk about the unfair genetic lottery, look at the rise of the mass monsters, and finally, discuss the ultimate price paid.
All right, Section 1, Shattering Bodybuilding Myths. It is time to aggressively deconstruct that classic bro science that dictates almost every everyday gym routine you see. Let's rapidly contrast some of these everyday expectations with actual scientific reality. First up, spot reduction. Total myth. You can do literally 1,000 crunches a day, but the fat cell sitting above your abs, it has absolutely zero special relationship with the muscle underneath it. Fat loss is systemic, and genetics decide where it comes from. And what about that frantic 30-minute anabolic window? You know, where you're desperately chugging a lukewarm protein shake in your car? Yeah, science actually shows the muscle-building process lasts up to 48 hours. So stop watching the clock and just hit your daily protein goals. Oh, and heavy weights causing injury? No. Ego lifting and bad form cause injury. Progressive resistance training actually reduces sports injuries by about 50%. Now, this brings us to a really important realization about what we actually feel in the gym. The pump and the soreness, they're temporary feelings. They are not measurements of permanent structural change. That crazy pump feels incredible, sure, but it's really just a temporary increase in fluid and blood flow. It's going to fade in a few hours, leaving exactly zero permanent structural change behind. And soreness, that just measures novelty and mechanical damage to the muscle fibers. Believe it or not, an advanced athlete can have a perfectly optimized hyperproductive session and wake up the next morning feeling completely fine. So let's just summarize the actual reality of training here. First, you don't need some magical rep range to grow. You can build muscle anywhere from 5 to 30 reps, as long as you're pushing close to failure. Also, fatigue piles up. If you're blasting out 40 sets a week, you aren't actually stimulating extra growth. You're really just accumulating recovery debt. You want the minimum effective dose, not maximum volume. And please, stop fearing cardio. Moderate cardio 2 to 3 times a week improves nutrient delivery, and frankly, it was used deliberately by some of the biggest mass monsters in history. And yes, steroids are prevalent in professional bodybuilding, no doubt about it. But do not underestimate the sheer power of supreme genetics and years of unseen disciplined work. Which brings us to Section 2, the unfair genetic lottery. This is where we need a bit of a reality check because no matter how perfectly you optimize the training we just talked about, your DNA sets an absolute physical ceiling. This comes down to a crucial biomechanical concept, muscle insertions. A muscle insertion is simply the specific point where a muscle attaches to the bone. It's dictated entirely by your DNA, and it determines the absolute visual potential of that muscle. So the crucial point here is, you literally cannot train your way out of a high or low insertion. Exercises develop the muscle that's already there. They do not change where it attaches. Let's look at how this builds completely different silhouettes on stage. Take Arnold Schwarzenegger. He had a high bicep insertion, which bunches the muscle up tight and creates that sharp, dramatic mountain peak when he flexes. Contrast that with someone who has a low bicep insertion, which creates a longer, fuller, but much softer hill shape. Neither is wrong, but only one creates that iconic silhouette. Then look at the lats. A low lat insertion pushes outward at the bottom, creating this massive, dramatic V-taper sweep down the torso. On the flip side, we have what is arguably the cruelest insertion in the gym, the high calf. If you have this, you know exactly what I mean. If your calf muscle belly is short and inserts high, it leaves a permanent, visible gap between the muscle and the ankle. And no amount of calf raises is ever going to close a space that physically just isn't there. This genetic reality applies to your abs too. Just look at this number, 4. Ronnie Coleman, one of the most supremely conditioned and massive bodybuilders in history, had a 4-pack. Not because he had too much body fat or wasn't training hard enough, but simply because his DNA dictated the number of horizontal tendinous intersections across his abdomen. You literally get what you're born with. So ultimately, you can build the blocks as thick as possible, but the grid they sit on was already drawn. Whether it's a high trap origin that seems to swallow your neck or an asymmetrical abdominal layout, these traits are permanent biological inheritances.
Basically, genetics decides the canvas, your training just applies the paint.
All right, Section 3, Rise of Mass Monsters. Now, what happens when you take the ultimate elite genetic lottery winners and combine them with relentless, almost monstrous effort?
Well, you get an era of truly freaky physiques. Just look at this lineup. Dorian Yates was the blueprint. He trained in a dark dungeon called Temple Gym and completely redefined the limits with a back of, honestly, geological thickness. Then there's Jay Cutler, built entirely on structural density. His legs were so grotesque early on in his career that he actually voluntarily stopped training them just to let his upper body catch up. Big Ramy brought absolute maximum volume, stepping on stage with legs that genuinely resembled a mutated Belgian blue bull. And Marcus Rule, he represented pure visual aggression. He didn't look balanced at all. He looked like he was built in a lab by someone who completely ignored every classical rule of human anatomy.
And this brilliantly illustrates what happens when the human body starts operating under completely different rules. When we talk about Ronnie Coleman, the undisputed king of freakiness, his body responded to the destructive stimulus of the gym by simply mutating further. The exact same stimulus that would completely destroy a normal athlete simply told Ronnie's body one word: more. Ronnie Coleman is the very reason we even talk about mass monsters today. We're talking about an 8-time Mr. Olympia champion. He competed at a mind-boggling 296 pounds shredded, carrying 22-inch arms cold, and the sheer strength absolutely matched the size. He squatted and deadlifted 800 pounds. Genetically, he possessed a remarkably rare low glute insertion that gave him this unprecedented, almost butterfly-like wingspan from the rear. Nobody in the entire history of competitive bodybuilding has ever combined that level of volume, density, and conditioning simultaneously. Which brings us to Section 4, the ultimate price paid. We've talked about the absolute heights of human achievement here, but now we have to transition to the devastating realities of pushing the human body so far beyond its natural biological limits. Now, what's really interesting and terrifying about this slide is this number right here, 833 grams. That was the weight of 26-year-old bodybuilder Dallas McCarver's heart at the time of his autopsy. To put that into perspective, that is nearly 3 times the size of a normal human heart, a heart that had just been chemically overloaded for years. And Dallas McCarver's story is, tragically, not unique. Let's map out this pretty somber timeline. In 1997, Andreas Munzer, who was known for this paper-thin skin and extreme conditioning, died at just 31 years old. His liver was absolutely riddled with tumors from extreme chemical protocols. In 2017, Rich Piana died after years of extreme use. In 2019, Flex Wheeler, the man Ronnie Coleman actually called the greatest bodybuilder he'd ever seen, had his right leg amputated at age 54 due to severe circulatory damage. And in 2021, reigning Mr. Olympia Sean Roden died of a massive heart attack at just 46. These aren't just isolated incidents, folks. They represent a systematic failure of the human body under absolute extremes. Rich Piana's passing really highlights a brutal irony here. Piana didn't hide anything. He pointed a camera at himself and told his millions of subscribers his exact chemical cycles, compounds, and dosages, and he died from those very compounds. His autopsy showed a dramatically enlarged heart and severe liver damage. It really just proves that transparency in bodybuilding is a dangerous thing to be, because the absolute truth of what it takes is often lethal. So how exactly does this sports culture handle all this truth, controversy, or tragedy? Historically, through complete erasure. When Arnold Schwarzenegger controversially won the 1980 Olympia out of peak condition, the crowd booed him, and the sport treated its greatest champion's win like a massive scandal. When Bob Paris became the first professional bodybuilder to publicly come out as gay in 1989, he was systematically ostracized. His sponsorships and invitations just completely vanished. When Bertil Fox was convicted of murder, the sport silently scrubbed him from conversation like he never even existed. And Sean Roden was banned from defending his title the exact same day sexual assault charges were filed. He never went to trial, was never convicted, and he died as the only reigning Mr. Olympia whose title was never officially stripped, but who never even had the chance to defend it. The industry relentlessly protects its image by just systematically ignoring those who fall out of line. Which leaves us right here. We've seen the science that completely breaks the everyday gym myths. We've seen the cold, hard genetic limits drawn by our DNA, and we've seen the breathtaking, awe-inspiring physiques of the mass monsters right alongside the tragic, frequently fatal toll it takes to actually build them. So I want to leave you with this final thought. When the genetic ceiling is reached and the myths are finally shattered, Is the pursuit of physical perfection truly worth the ultimate price the human body has to pay? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning what you see.